One of the defining times in my life was the summer I spent in Africa. From roughly May to August in 2000, I lived and studied and traveled, first in Guinea-Conakry on the west coast of sub-Saharan Africa, and then in Kenya in the east. In Nairobi, I took an intensive course in African culture through the Maryknoll Institute, alongside a collection of people from various parts of Africa and about a half a dozen Americans. One of the Americans was African American, visiting Africa for her first time. As a woman of color, she knew that she never fully belonged in the US. Such is the underlying racism in North America that isn't actually underlying all that much anymore. At any rate, she was excited to be in the motherland, from where her ancestors had generally hailed. Her experience, though, as I remember hearing about it, was difficult. She didn't speak Swahili, and while many Kenyans spoke English, it still set you apart as a foreigner. Besides that, living in sub-Saharan Africa is just hard in all kinds of ways. Subconsciously or otherwise, at least part of her wanted that sense of belonging that she didn't have back in New York. And then it turned out that she was very much American. And while she didn't stand out visually the way the rest of us did, she still found herself as a visiting foreigner. I certainly experienced being a foreigner. I looked different than many locals, for one thing. And Nairobi, Kenya is a large cosmopolitan city, so at least there's a bigger variety of people than in Guinea on the west coast, which is much poorer and has very little tourism. In Guinea, the only white people are aid workers or artists, drummers and dancers, and there's not that many of them. I learned what it felt like to literally turn heads just walking down the road, because I looked weird and I stood out. I learned that vulnerable feeling of everyone knowing, including myself, that I was different, that I didn't belong, I was a foreigner. In Guinea, if you saw another white person, you would stop and say hello because you knew the other person was a fellow foreigner and that you had that in common, even if you spoke different languages or came from different countries, which was often the case. A few summers later, I again experienced what it was to be a foreigner when I lived on the island of St. Vincent as a student intern at the church. One particularly memorable day came when all of a sudden in a crowded room, I heard a familiar accent. I searched the faces until I found the speaker who sounded just like me. I stood out with my pale face, but her dark complexion meant that visually she fit in with the crowd. Her voice, though, was just like mine. She had been raised in Toronto, and she was visiting her extended family. And she was as happy as I was to meet a fellow Canadian who shared a commonality, common experience despite the differences in our backgrounds. We were both foreigners in St. Vincent, if in different ways and to different degrees, but still our familiarity bonded us. Returning home both those summers was challenging. Home hadn't changed all that much in the 3 months I was away, but I had changed. Experiencing one's own culture after living in another is disconcerting. Grocery shopping, for instance, can be almost traumatizing. I remember standing one day in front of a veritable wall of barbecue sauce, paralyzed by the choices before me. Choosing what kind of barbecue sauce to buy wasn't something I had to deal with in St. Vincent. It wasn't that I was deprived, I just had to use the one or maybe choose between two available varieties, which was much simpler. Why do we need so many choices, I wondered. The tyranny of choice, I realized, is a significant feature of North American culture. And so many other things, some glorious, some distressing. It's weird to return and feel like a foreigner in your own home until you finally acculturate once more to the familiar place, even if you're a different person. When we're away, especially if it's in a hard place or a place we don't want to be, we yearn for home. We dream of home. We idealize home. Returning, though, is rarely as easy or as comfortable or as straightforward as we imagined. Maybe we were away long enough that home changed. Maybe we just forgot some of the realities of home. Maybe home stayed the same and we changed. Being home, being a foreigner, these are not simple or static categories. Returning is never easy. One of them, in our gospel story today, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. 10 people with a skin disease cried out for Jesus' help that day. In the place between Samaria and Galilee, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us, they begged. And the abundant grace of God through Jesus is poured out indiscriminately. Before even completing Jesus' simple instruction, all are made clean. All 10 are restored to community. Only one turned back with praise on his lips, and he was a Samaritan. For the early hearers of the story, it is a shocking twist, for he is a foreigner. Not one of us, an outsider, a stranger, a migrant, alien. He was a foreigner. He alone turns back, praising God. He was an outsider, and he alone returns to offer gratitude. He was a Samaritan whose faith made him well. Foreigners experience a place differently than the locals. Newcomers see things those who have been around a long time have stopped noticing. Outsiders are keenly aware of the dynamics of belonging and not belonging. Foreigners, newcomers, outsiders don't take life for granted, don't take community for granted, because it's all new, it's all unexpected, it's all confusing and exciting in turn. Familiarity sort of dulls our senses with its comfort. On this weekend, when we give thanks, the foreigners, the newcomers, the outsiders among us remind us of the bounty of God's grace. All of us are already loved. All of us already belong. All of us are already offered healing. And those who turn back in praise also know the gift of faith.